Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I recently restarted one of my favorite games, The Evil Within, which I cannot explain why it's my favorite game, but it's a survival horror game directed by Shinji Mikami about a detective who gets called to a mental asylum, and then kind of shit hits the fan and he ends up on this wild adventure through a distorting reality. It's just a lot of fun. I really enjoy it, and I recently started replaying it and streaming it with my friend Six over on Twitch, so I've been really enjoying it, and I thought it would be fun today, sort of as we're approaching fall and I'm thinking about my favorite things, because fall is my favorite season. I thought it'd be fun to recommend books to the characters from The Evil Within. So that's what we're doing, and we'll just dive straight in. So our first character, our penultimate character, is that detective, Sebastian Castellanos, and one of the big things about him is that he is very much a family man. We learn a little bit about his family throughout the game, and a lot of his personality and the way he's dealing with things stems from the fact that he has lost both his wife and his child, and he's kind of reeling from the grief of that. It's been a while, but he still really hasn't moved past it, and we know throughout the game that he has like an alcohol problem. So he's really struggling with the loss of his family, and a little bit of his story is about like how far he would go for his family, and that really carries over into game 2 as well. But because of that being so like prominent throughout his story and the kind of psychological elements, I wanted to recommend him The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which is a title I always struggle to say, by Grady Hendrix. This book is about a woman who is in a book club, and the book club kind of gets infiltrated by this guy that they increasingly believe is a vampire, and it's really about like how far are these women willing to go, particularly our main character Patricia, to protect their families and deal with the loss of people that they care about. I really love this book. I think this is my favorite Grady Hendrix, but I think that Patricia's fight for her family and the lengths that she is willing to go to try and protect them would really resonate with Sebastian. I think he would really appreciate her grit and determination, and I think he would also connect with some of the issues that we see with Patricia, with kind of her getting lost in her grief or her kind of despair over the situation. There's also a bit of a substance use thing going on in here too. So I think that he would really just connect well with the main character of this one because of that shared story about like family and loss and like fighting to protect the people you care about. Next up, we have Sebastian's partner, Joseph Oda, who is Sebastian's partner after his wife Mayra leaves the team. And I say Mayra, her name is Myra. I swear it's my favorite game. So Joseph is his new partner. They've been working together for a few years by the time of the game. And Joseph is a very like by the book detective, but he's also a really supportive friend. He cares a lot about Sebastian, but at the same time we see that care expressed as a willingness to report Sebastian for behavior that he thinks is unseemly for a detective, and kind of pushing Sebastian to be a better person, but also putting that like justice kind of above their friendship, which I think is a really interesting character. And so I wanted to recommend him The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison. This is a spin-off series from The Goblin Emperor, and in this one we're following Thara Kelleher, who is a witness for the dead. He can speak to the dead, and he works basically as a detective solving various mysteries. And he's very like, I wouldn't say quite by the book, he does bend the rules sometimes, but he's incredibly devoted to the ideal of justice and is willing to sacrifice the people around him to achieve justice, that he feels like justice is the most important thing overall. And so he really suffers from that. Like, it doesn't always lead to good things for him, but one of the things he's constantly warning people is that he's going to find the truth, and sometimes the truth is going to suck. So do they really want him to find the truth, because it may ruin their lives? And so I feel like Joseph isn't quite that extreme. He's not quite as far along that line, along that spectrum as Thara Kelleher is, but I think he would really respect Kelleher's like devotion to the ideal of justice and his willingness to kind of do whatever it takes to find the truth and to, you know, bring somebody to justice no matter what kind of harm or pain it causes. I think he would not necessarily relate to it, but I think he'd respect it. I think he'd find it an interesting perspective because he's very like intellectual, and I think he would it'd be like a fun new perspective for him to consider. After that, we have the rookie on the team. This is Julie Kidman. She's the newest member of their team, and she is a young detective who has some other things going on. We kind of find out what her motives are throughout the story, and I don't want to ruin that for you if you'd like to play it. But one of the things I can tell you about Kidman is that she's somebody who is kind of rejected early on, like early in life. She feels kind of abandoned, and so she's looking for belonging kind of wherever she can find it. And she ends up looking in rather the wrong place. So that's all I'll really say on that. But I think I want to recommend her Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I can't remember, I may have recommended this book in one of these videos before. This one is following a woman whose name is escaping me, Maggie Hosky. I love Maggie, she's great, but she's this very, like, aggressive, determined person, and she was also kind of rejected quite young because of her powers. She lives on the kind of edge of society as a monster hunter, traveling around a sort of post-apocalyptic North America, fighting monsters, basically. But we find out throughout this story about her connection to somebody who ultimately was quite toxic and abusive for her, and it was this sense of, like, he helped her feel like she belonged, gave her a purpose, but he has ultimately, like, betrayed her. And so she's kind of grappling with that and starting to find friendship and belonging outside of that. She has a sidekick here who she gradually develops a friendship with, and it's, like, really charming. And I think you see that a little bit of that with Kidman as well, where she is kind of looked for belonging in this horrible place, started to realize that this is not good for her, but she's kind of trapped. She doesn't really have anywhere else to go, but she started to form, like, a tentative friendship with Sebastian and Joseph, and that sort of develops over the story, especially as they find out more about her background and more about what she's actually up to, and I think it develops in some interesting ways. It becomes complicated in some interesting ways, especially moving into Game 2, which I feel like I should come back to this at some point, maybe do a version of this for Evil Within 2, but anyway, I think that she would relate to Maggie a lot, and appreciate Maggie's story, and maybe see some hope for herself in finding that, like, belonging outside of the situation that she's gotten herself into. Now we're moving on to some of our, well, not entirely villainous characters. You know what? Rather than moving on the way I was going to do it, we're going to go on to Leslie. Leslie is the last innocent person, and probably one of the only truly innocent people in this game. He is a mental patient who escapes with the group at the very start of the game. He's this young man who is sort of incapable of communicating through, like, his own words. He mostly, like, repeats what other people will say back to them. And he has a interesting connection to the main villain of the story, we'll talk about later. But Leslie is sort of running through this horrible nightmare realm, just trying to, like, survive. He's just fleeing, and at various points they catch up to him and they are trying to protect him, but ultimately, like, he's sort of having to go through this world on his own. And because I love Leslie, and because Leslie has done nothing wrong in his life ever, and deserves better things, I want to recommend Leslie, A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. This is just a warm hug of a book. This is about a tea monk who starts to question their purpose in life and goes out into the forest on an adventure, only to encounter a robot who's been living in the forest for however many years. And the two of them go on this adventure together, and it's sort of about, like, what is purpose, or, like, do you need a purpose to have a fulfilling life? But it's a warm hug of a book. It's just very gentle, and it's a lot about the friendship that develops between our tea monk and our robot, and I just think it's a really charming book, and it deals with some deeper topics, but it's just comforting, and I think that that's what Leslie deserves. Leslie needs, like, a comforting read, and to, like, maybe not be getting chased by horrible zombies everywhere. I think that would be good for him. So now we're moving on to our villains. I'll backtrack a little bit. First up, we have Marcelo Jimenez, who is a doctor. He's one of our two villains we're going to talk about. There are some other villains, but a lot of them get kind of revealed throughout the story, so they're not as central. We have a lot of, like, kind of tertiary antagonists. But we have Marcelo Jimenez, who is one of the doctors at Beacon Mental Hospital, where everything kind of kicks off. And he is Leslie's doctor. And I wouldn't say he's, like, outright evil, but we find out that he's very unethical, and he has been doing some experimentation on the side, and he's definitely been enabling the main villain, and is now also terrified of the main villain. So you have to work with him at various points and also work against him at various points. So he has sort of a complicated relationship to the main group, the main team, and especially Sebastian, who interacts with him at various points. But I want to recommend him Sorrowland by River Solomon. This one I know I recommended in the last version of this that I did, where I recommended books to my dog. I did it at that time for motherhood. This time around, I want to recommend it because there is some, like, dubious experimentation happening in this book, and there is in particular somebody who is involved in that, who is, like, actively putting people in harm and putting them in the way of those doing the experiments, who gets his comeuppance in a really dramatic and awful way, and I think that Jimenez needs to read that and reflect on it, and maybe reconsider his choices, maybe find a new path in life. Just a thought. Our final character is the main villain of the game. This is Ruvik. He's not really a spoiler because he shows up in, like, the first minute of the game. You see him, and Jimenez goes, like, is it Ruvik, and then, you know, kind of moves on. Ruvik is this interesting fellow. He is a former aristocrat who has been experimenting on people for a long time and has found himself at the mercy of the people who were previously funding his research. So he has become an experiment subject himself and now is like angry and murderous and wants out. He wants to escape. And so for him, I wanted to recommend Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Because there's a distinctly technological bent to the horror in here, which I think is pretty clear pretty early on, although I love the twist of like what's actually happening in this book. We have kind of a technological horror thing, which is sort of what's happening with Ruvik. There's a big brain machine in The Evil Within. It's sort of like on the cover of the game. So there's kind of that thing going on. But there's like this level of superiority from the villains of like, I am better than everyone else, therefore I should get to do this thing. My way of doing this is like what humanity needs for progress. And I think that there's that sort of on both sides with Ruvik and with Bury Your Gaze. And I think that there's that like connection between them. And also, again, kind of for Ruvik, there's a pretty dramatic ending for our villains in here, and I think that Ruvik, again, needs to reflect on that. I don't think he's going to learn anything. I think he's a psychopath. I think he should still read it. I think he should still maybe hopefully learn something from it. Hopefully not gain more ideas for future villainous acts, but I think there's some connections between like what Ruvik is up to and the kind of experiments that he's running, and some of what happens here with the like technology aspect of Bury Your Gaze. So those are all the books that I recommend to characters from The Evil Within. Let me know down in the comments below if you've played this game, and if you have, let me know if you have any different recommendations for these characters. I would be very curious to see what other people would recommend them. But I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting at least twice a week, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!